This is Paul. How are you? Today is the last day of Sukkot, and I'm in my sukkah. For a couple years I was making my own sukkahs out of tarps, but every year it seems to get hotter and hotter, and this year we decided to opt for the screened-in tent, which means I actually get to sit in here for more than 5 or 6 minutes, because the last 2 years in a row, man, it was like an easy bake oven with no chance of getting any air in. Anyways, so as I'm sitting in here on the final day of Sukkot for my church, I'm realizing some things. I have an amazing family. I have an amazing extended church family. I have an amazing leader. Leader of the ministry of Ruach Ministries out in Brandon is David Jones, and David Jones has done so much for me in my life. I can't begin to tell you the wisdom and the grace that he and his wife, Faith, have just poured into our family. Even before we started being part of that ministry. And one of the more interesting aspects of being a part of this ministry is that we're Messianic Christians. And for those who don't know, the easiest way I can explain it is we're Christians, we believe in Jesus, but we kind of celebrate things the way you would see traditional Jewish people celebrate. Things that we see kind of in reflection of the commands in the Bible and the Old Testament and the New Testament. So, there's some differences between our what we do and ultimately traditional Christians, but by no means are we much different in the sense that we do believe in the power of the cross and Jesus Christ. And so I want to get that out of the air so that it doesn't ultimately skew the next message I want to bring to everybody. And I'm not one to normally do this, but I felt kind of moved to do something. And when you're moved to do anything in this world, so long as it's positive, you should do it. You got one life to live, and ultimately, if you don't act on these things, you miss the moment. So here I am. So it is like day 2 of what is the hottest fall I've ever been in. This past, Saturday or Sunday was the hottest day on record here in Tampa. So although I'm in the screen-in enclosure, I'm dripping sweat. It's crazy, and I'm squinting because the sun is still just destroying my forehead. But anyways, rabbit trail. Why am I bringing you here? So there was a great teaching that Pastor David had taught called Jonah and the Sukkah. And the Sukkah, just so everybody kind of knows here, the point of Sukkot, one of the physical things that we do is we put up this tent or this temporary dwelling. There's a little more to it, but shortly, the idea here is to remind you of the time in which the Israelites traveled in temporary dwellings, okay? Remember, they were in the desert for 40 years. Most of that was to their own doing, but nonetheless, that's where that came from. And so, while they're wandering in the desert, nothing was quite permanent because God said, get up and move. And then they did. Or they stood behind and they got lost. And believe it or not, there are oral traditions that there are those who just stood behind because they didn't want to move anymore. And those traditions kind of those oral teachings lend to that those people did not do very well. So, as I'm sitting in here and I'm baking, I'm realizing that that desert period of time for those people, for the 40 years that were in the desert, that were wandering. For those who don't know the story, the trip was only supposed to take a couple of weeks. I think maybe a month at max to get to where they were coming from Egypt to where they were going, to the promise. Yet, out of their disobedience and out of their own mouths, they wound up staying for 40 years. Now, I asked myself, why would the Lord allow for that? And the best way I can explain it that I felt lay on my heart was because he was merciful. They weren't ready. The generation that was an adult at the time of the initial leaving of Egypt, they were too tainted by what was going on in their life. They were too caught up in it. And as much as God wanted them to go into the promised land, he knew right then and there that that generation just was not going to cross over. And, that's a hard pill to swallow. It really is. It's a hard pill to swallow to recognize that you're the generation that has to be obedient and not go into the promised land, but to be prepared to teach your children to not make the same mistakes so that they can enter in the promised land. And I don't necessarily that means your whole life is painted in such a manner that is a negative light. I don't think that the people who lived in the dwelling of the Lord in front of them on a daily basis for 40 years until they the final one left this earth, until the new generation can move forward, had a miserable life. I think they just knew that they missed it. There was a time, there was a place. They weren't there at the right time and the place, and they just realized that they had to make the new decision. So why is this all important? Interestingly enough, there was a teaching called Jonah and the Sukkah, done by Ruach Ministries. And ultimately, the summary is that, we all know the story of Jonah. Jonah's put in the whale, the fish, whatever. We can argue the point. I don't care. For 3 days, and the Lord let him out and spat him out or vomited him out. Think red tide, nasty smell, covered in body, and then all of a sudden you're barfed out on the shore of where you're supposed to be at. Okay, but then everybody says, "Oh, well, they just turned and ultimately just did exactly what the Lord said," because kind of like the children's books kind of just narrate to the part where he skips over the part where ultimately he has to sit in this booth, which by the way is a sukkah, and sweat it out for some time. Meaning that there is a period of time of where the grace came in, and the time he ultimately still had to sit on the place he was supposed to be at and sweat out his issues. And this Sukkot has been good. I've enjoyed it a lot more than I have in the past. Not that I have anything to complain about, but I've just been too busy. And this week has been nonetheless too busy. There have been days I've not been able to sit in my sukkah, and I've literally ran in here right at the time of before sundown and spent some time in here, ate a snack, and ultimately obeyed that commandment, which is to ultimately in your generations, you will dwell in sukkahs during the time appointed, which is Sukkot, which is a period of time in which we do so. So it's really fun. The kids get in here; they love it. We wave a lulav, which is kind of like some plant branches, and I'm not going to go into detail on that, and a etrog, which is a really expensive lemon. It's a citrus, and you just do this thing where God tells you to do it, and it does not have any physical bearing on who you are. It's just one of those commandments that you're just supposed to do it. It makes absolutely no sense to the common mind, and my neighbors probably think we're crazy because we shake around this lemon and these branches, and we pray for about 5 or 7 minutes, and then the rest of the time we just have some fun in here and do whatever. And at the end of the day, my summary is, for those who have made it this far into the video, there are going to be times that God's going to have you in a temporary dwelling in the place that He promised you. Think about that. Everybody thinks that because you're going to get to the place that you're promised, that ultimately that is when you've arrived. It's not. That's not when you arrive. You could be exactly where you're supposed to be right now, but you're dwelling in a hot, mobile structure and not in the coolness of your permanence, which would be this house behind me, which ultimately has air conditioning and is far shadier. But this is where God has me at this moment. And that's where God has me in this life. at this moment. And this is where God has a lot of you. So I just wanted to share this with you as I'm sweating at about 97 degrees, but there is a beautiful breeze, so no complaints. It is a gorgeous day. I have really no complaints. I'm making some wonderful chicken right now for a future party we're about to go to. We have a big Sukkot party. I'd love for all of you guys to come and join us at least one time and just experience it. And even if you don't necessarily understand it all, I will tell you, the first 2 or 3 years of walking in the walk that my wife and I have been doing, it's been a lot of just doing and then the understanding coming later. But I will tell you, when that understanding hits, like one of these moments right now, it is amazing. And I can't begin to tell you, when the physical meets the spiritual, how permanent that lays on your heart and how much it makes such a radical difference in your walk going forward. Anyways, this is Paul. Have a happy Sukkot. It was good talking to you all. Bye-bye.